people and states put their hopes in a green recovery to both achieve their climate targets and overcome the economic downturn brought on by the COVID-19 pandemic. But also, in the longer run, a structural change towards a greener and more sustainable economic system is needed in order to ensure both adequate living conditions for life on Earth and economic prosperity. But how can we get there?
Ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, I will move straight to introduce our panel. And again, I'll keep the introduction short, and I will request to all speakers that you also please keep your responses to our questions short, meaning under 3 minutes, please, because we have only half an hour for this very important subject that we want to talk about. It's a pleasure to welcome Yuri Vitrenko. He is acting Minister of Energy for Ukraine and former executive director of the company Naftogaz. Great to have you with us. Also, will be joining us, well, we'll come back. Maybe he'll join us imminently. It's also a pleasure to welcome Jane McDonald, is Executive Vice President of Canada's International Institute for Sustainable Development, and she's also former Policy Director for the Canadian Ministry of Environment and Climate Change. And we are working on getting our connection to Argentina's Secretary of Energy, Dario Martinez. I'm hoping that he will be with us shortly. But because of our short time frame, I'm just going to move right ahead with a first round of questions. And as you know, our topic is green structural change and how we make it happen. And Yuri Vitrenko, if I may begin with you, like many countries worldwide, you saw GDP in Ukraine shrink significantly since the pandemic. However, we've heard again and again here at the conference that there are opportunities in this crisis. So I wonder how you see it as energy minister of a gas-producing country. What opportunities lie in the post-COVID-19 recovery for a green transformation of your energy system?
I would also mention, first and foremost, new jobs and the growth. We currently estimate that we can get as much as 500,000 new jobs because of this green transition. If you mention some particular opportunities, I would start with energy efficiency, because energy efficiency sector, first of all, is rather labor intensive, and Ukraine, unfortunately, is not very energy efficient. So there is a great potential for Ukraine to increase its energy efficiency, and basically it means that we will use less energy, especially less not green energy. I would also mention that we see a huge potential in Ukraine for the hydrogen economy. It's a new field in Europe. It's very promising. Ukraine has a well-developed transmission system that can be used to transport hydrogen, green hydrogen, to Europe, in particular to Germany. And we see a lot of interest from our German partners, for example, for this green hydrogen coming from Ukraine. And there is a whole economy. It's not just basically the energy sector. There is a whole economy around the use of hydrogen in the world. I would also mention that Ukraine has a huge potential that we're currently using, but we intend to keep using its potential to develop more solar and wind. Ukraine is the biggest area-wise country in Europe, so we have a lot of land for solar plants and for wind farms. We estimate that we can produce from solar and wind 2 times more than our whole energy sector at the moment. It means that we can export a lot of green energy, either in form of electricity or green hydrogen to Europe. And that's, of course, would be a huge help for Ukraine as a developing economy to get some sustainable revenue streams especially again based on some market integration with Europe, our strategic partner. Because as you know, we're in country at war with Russia. So for us, it's not just important to have economic growth, but to have this economic growth with partners we can rely on, like Europe, like the US, like the civilized world.
And in fact, a little bit later, I want to come back to the role that international cooperation can play in supporting you in achieving those aims. But let me first go to Dario Martinez and say a very warm welcome to you, sir, Secretary of Energy, former head of Argentina's Fuels and Energy Commission. If you would, speak to the same question that I just put, and I'm not quite sure whether you did hear it, so I will just pose it once again. The green recovery, building back after COVID. What do you see for Argentina as opportunities to move the green energy transition forward in the context of recovery?
Bueno, primero agradecer la invitación y a los organizadores por permitirme expresarme aquí y ya yendo a la consulta, nosotros entendemos que los efectos que se pueden generar con un proceso de orientación sustentable tienen que ser y deben ser tanto en el sistema economico de un país.
Yes, we believe that the energy transition needs to take place both in our economy and at international level.
La pandemia nos ha obligado a reflexionar en la importancia
economy, but also in the welfare field. And the pandemic has made us reflect not only about how important health is, but also how important the health of the planet is. And following the pandemic, we
la cooperación internacional y el multilateralismo
have a chance to progress. We need international cooperation, we need multilateralism, and the key will be how we can work better together. And we have all analyzed the conditions in which our population is living. The industrial countries have done it.
O que realmente en este momento se considera que no es lo apropiado. Creo también que en función de este acuerdo global para alcanzar la neutralidad climática para la segunda mitad del siglo, tenemos que actuar rápidamente y para eso hace falta
agreement on achieving climate neutrality by the middle of the century needs to be implemented quickly. We need to transform our energy system. We need the industry, researchers, the civil society. All of these stakeholders need to create a new framework so that the energy transition really can bring us into a clean energy system. And politicians need to set the policy framework for this change in conformity with the global targets. We need to act in solidarity internationally so that we can come up with this new system. We need to progress with clear ideas and not forget, as we do so, that each region, each country has different circumstances.
Que los efectos en cadena de esta orientación sustentable en el sistema económico de un país impliquen un desarrollo que se traduzca en impactos positivos tanto en la esfera social, económica, todo en la ambiental.
Have to be positive.
Cuando hablo de esos efectos que sean positivos, me refiero
the economy, but also for the environment and for society.
A mejorar la calidad de la
it's
salud,
important to
a mejorar en
reduce
educación,
poverty,
en equidad de género,
to improve
en la
health,
generación de
to
empleo,
improve
y,
education,
por supuesto,
to improve
repito,
equality, gender equality,
ambiental,
and of
en lo cual
course
tenemos que trabajar
to
mucho.
improve
Y creo que esa energía asequible que
the
nosotros tenemos
environmental
que
situation.
lograr poner a disposición y que no sea
This
contaminante
energy
y que tenga
must be available. It
que ver
must
con el
not
mundo
be
que
damaging to the
necesitamos,
climate.
que queremos reconstruir, necesita estas medidas
So
urgentes. El
we
cambio
want
climático es una realidad que está afectando a la humanidad
rebuild. And climate change is a reality which is already having consequences, and therefore we need to act now. The pandemic has put us in a position in which we have understood globally that we can set targets and achieve goals, just as we have done with the pandemic. Because if we don't work together, we will not be able to tackle the problem. So we need to assume this unique responsibility and make sure that there will be a better world which can stand on a sound basis of sustainability and inclusivity.
Muchas gracias. Let me move on to Jane McDonald and ask you, and this is, of course, very much a policy best practices exchange that we do have here at BETD. So I'd like to ask you, in your view, taking into account both the pandemic and the urgency, as Michael Mann reminded us, of the climate neutrality target, what are the first best solutions for stimulating green economic growth? And I'll just tell you that, of course, at every BETD, we do discuss the issue of carbon pricing, and we agree every year that we're not yet where we need to be with that tool. So if you want to mention that one, that's fine, but maybe you can mention a few others as well.
Thank you so much, and thank you for inviting me. Wonderful to be here. I think the good news for this conversation is that the topic of a green recovery and building back better has stayed at the top of the political agenda over the last year. In 2010, you'll remember that we missed the opportunity in our rush to reboot economic growth following the 2008-2009 financial crisis. We succeeded in getting people back to work, but we did so on the back of a historic increase in climate pollution. And that is not the case now. Over the past year, countries all around the globe have announced the first big pieces of big green economic recovery packages. And they're doing that because I think there's a general acknowledgement now that the good news is that it's going to take a lot of work and jobs to reset the energy infrastructure of our economies. And multiple studies have been done to look at what types of investments would also help advance our response to climate change. You'll recall even a year ago, an Oxford study that came out that included leading economists like Joseph Stiglitz, Nicholas Stern, and it analyzed possible COVID-19 economic recovery packages. And their work really showed that the green projects create more jobs, deliver high short-term returns per dollar spent, and lead to increased long-term cost savings compared with traditional fiscal stimulus. And here in Canada, ISD chaired a similar task force for resilient recovery with experts from across the country that put forward recommendations to government on a package of investment in the billions that would help build the infrastructure and human capacity we know we're going to need to meet our 2050 climate commitments. And across all of these studies, the great news is there was remarkable consensus on what to move on first. One, invest in, and I think we've touched on some of this already in these two initial comments today. So one, invest in efficiency, retrofitting buildings to make them more efficient. There is a huge lift to do across most countries on that front, and that is a jobs opportunity. Number two, jumpstart the production, adoption of zero-emission vehicles, including all the needed infrastructure that goes along with that. Number three, growing clean energy sectors. This ranges from new electricity grids, investments in renewable energy production, and all of these are shown to create, in the short term, these are pretty labor-intensive things that create jobs. And research now shows twice as many jobs per dollar as fossil fuel investments. And the last investment I would say that comes up consistently across all of these analyses over the last year or so is that putting people to work restoring and conserving our natural infrastructure, like wetlands, coastal marshes, forests, can really increase our resiliency and, again, provide big employment opportunities. And as you've heard, there are multiple proposals on the table in the U.S. right now to create a new civilian conservation or climate corps, putting people to work planting trees, restoring public lands and waters, and training them for environmentally friendly careers. So I think we're seeing a lot of consensus right now in terms of what types of investments could really give us the environmental and economic payback that we all are looking for at the moment. And there's actually a huge opportunity here to put a lot of people to work and train them for what are the growth industries of the future.
Thank you very much. And let me go back to Michael Mann now. And in your closing section of your keynote, you made it very clear that the transformation has to be structural and that simply switching to soya milk and bike riding, as worthy as that may be, isn't going to get us where we need to go. So what do you see as how we can really drive that kind of level of structural change that's needed?
Yeah, well, you know, an individual action is important. I don't want to leave people with the wrong impression. We should all do those things that we can do to minimize our carbon footprint. In many cases, that makes us healthier, it saves us money, makes us feel better about ourselves. It sets a good example for other people. We should do all those things, but without structural change, without policies, we're not going to see the sort of decarbonization, the rate and magnitude of decarbonization that we need. We need to bring global carbon emissions down by a factor of 2 within the next 10 years if we are to remain on a path to limiting warming below that very dangerous 1.5 degrees Celsius. So, you know, it's not a mystery as to how we do that. Economists, sociologists, political scientists, we know that we need incentives for people to make the right choices. Some people will engage in carbon-friendly consumer actions and activities simply because they know it's the right thing to do. But many people won't. They have to elect to make the right decisions. And the way that we get them to do that is to provide incentives for them to do so. So we have to level the playing field in the energy marketplace, right? For too long, we've been providing subsidies to fossil fuel infrastructure and not providing similar levels of support for renewable energy. That's a perversion of the incentive structure. We need the opposite. We need to incorporate, we need a price signal that communicates the damage that carbon pollution is doing, and that price signal in the economy so that consumers are led to make climate and carbon-friendly choices. And that can be done through carbon pricing, and there are various ways of doing carbon pricing. Some of the critics from sort of the left, from the progressive side of the conversation, increasingly have been critical of carbon pricing because they think that it will lead to undue impact. It will fall mostly on sort of lower income frontline communities. It doesn't have to be that way. In Canada, in Australia, before the incoming Conservative government got rid of it, carbon pricing was working, and it was actually playing out in a progressive way. Lower income earners were actually benefiting. So it all depends on what you do with the revenue. Carbon pricing can be done in a way that is consistent with a just transition, but it's just one of the tools in the toolbox. We need subsidies and stimulus for renewable energy. Those are all sort of demand side measures. Supply side measures, we've got to stop government funding of new fossil fuel infrastructure. We've got to stop the allowing fossil fuel companies to use public lands to expand pipelines and other infrastructure. And the good news, as we've already heard, is that the Biden administration really is incorporating that sort of thinking across all of their actions. Every agency, every division of the government, climate change is now part of the decision-making across our government. And that really is the difference. We haven't seen something like that before. That's part of why I'm so optimistic that with the leadership we're now seeing by the United States returning to the world stage and demonstrating we're doing our due diligence, that's going to bring other actors together. That's going to help us see the global action that we need.
Thank you very much. And in fact, we heard some very powerful messages here from both the UK minister and from Patricia Espinosa of the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, talking about the fact that fossil fuel subsidies will be in the limelight in Glasgow in November. So let me go now to a second round of questions, again, with the request for really brief responses. We have only about 14 minutes left on the clock at this point, dear speakers. So I'll go first again to Minister Vitrenko and ask you about the role of international cooperation, and especially cooperation with international investors, because you mentioned the importance of the private sector. What are your priorities for leveraging that kind of cooperation? What are they looking for from you, and how can you work with them?
We've seen some explosive growth of private investments into solar energy generating capacities. Again, frankly, it's because of the rather high feed-in tariff that we have in Ukraine, so it's not purely market-based. But now we need to complement these solar capacities with some energy storage so that we can start phasing out our coal generating capacities. For that purpose, of course, we would welcome private investments. As I mentioned, we have a huge potential for renewables, and energy storage is just the best complement for the development of renewables. Second, I would say it may sound not 100% politically correct, at least for some, but Ukraine is also big in nuclear generation, in nuclear power plants. And here we need to make our existing capacities more efficient and modernize them so that, again, it's safe and it's efficient. And again, it helps phasing out coal from the energy mix. And here we are working with, for example, US company Westinghouse. We are replacing our cooperation with the Russian side with our cooperation with this US company with some facilities in Sweden. So we do hope that this cooperation will continue successfully. On top of it, I would mention that we would welcome and we need huge investments in energy efficiency, distribution, gas and electricity distribution networks, again, to increase its efficiency, smart meters, smart grids, smart everything, because it's another side of the equation. The smarter we consume the energy we have, the less energy we need. So it also helps the world, it helps to fight the climate change. And last but not least, of course, we would welcome more investments in the generation sector, in renewables. It's both solar and wind and even biofuels. Of course, basically, it's not completely carbon neutral, but with modern technologies, it's just at least more efficient and it's renewable. So these four priorities are most welcome for foreign investors to come and to invest, and we will fully support these investments because we believe it will be in the best interest of everybody.
Thank you very much, Minister. Let me move straight on to Secretary Martinez, also with the question about international cooperation. It's a main theme here at the Berlin Energy Transition Dialogue that this has to be a global and cooperative effort. So very briefly, if you would, the 2 or 3 most important points for Argentina in terms of international cooperation.
Para un país en desarrollo como la Argentina, el rol de la cooperación internacional es esencial.
Well, for a developing country like Argentina, international cooperation is, of course, the key. Really, it's so important for us to work together with the international community. We need some international support that will help us to bring about change more quickly and more dynamically. And of course, we don't want to leave anybody behind. In Argentina, we believe that the energy transition must cover all sustainable energy sources. And particularly, we have a lot of history with fuels. We have a lot of history with hydropower and also nuclear. And we've a lot of history with renewables and solar and wind. But there we're still expanding things, and we need to support our natural resources, and we need to use our sources sustainably, because we have international commitments to combat climate change. And I have to say that our country, in view of its geographical diversity, has the possibility to develop various energy systems, and all of these energy sources need to become part of the energy transition, so it's better for the environment. And of course, we also need to promote these resources, to fund these resources. Our ministry has always taken part in these cooperative initiatives and has always endeavored to share experience. I think that's very important in order to achieve our targets, that we learn from each other. And we're working on hydrogen, for example. In particular, with the international banks, we need support, the financial support, so that we can really have the funding we need to drive forward the energy transition in Argentina.
Thank you very much. And in fact, that was a point that was repeatedly underlined.
Dieser Punkt ist wiederholt unterstrichen worden in Diskussionen über grünen Wasserstoff.
Indeed, financing is going to be crucial,
die Finanzierung
as well. So
entscheidend sein wird, und auch die Zusammenarbeit. Jim McDonald, ich komme zurück auf die Frage der fossilen Brennstoffe, denn ich wisse, dass Sie gerade an den globalen
stimulate reform. So what would you tell both the UK as COP26 host and also the UNFCCC as they get ready for the COP? How do we get movement on this? It's been a topic for years, and yet again, action is too slow.
Yes, that's for sure. And as Michael mentioned, what we're looking for here and what fossil fuel subsidy reform is about is systemic change. We need a way to remove distortions from markets and artificial barriers to clean energy technology, so we're not stalling this transition. This is particularly important this year as we talk about ambition around the COP, because the investments we need to be making in the clean energy sector have long lead times. And if we don't get on them now, we're going to miss the window for hitting our 2050 targets. So it's really critical. And, you know, we talked a little bit about carbon pricing too, and carbon pricing and fossil fuel subsidies really go hand in hand. One without the other will not be as effective as both of them in tandem will be. So think of it as a boat with a leak that is taking on water. To fix the situation, you need to both fix the leak and bail out the water. Doing one but not the other doesn't ultimately solve our problem. And this really matters because over the last year, ISD has led something called the Energy Policy Tracker. You can go check it out online. It's tracking investments in the energy sector as a response to the COVID pandemic. And what we've seen is 30% of investments so far can be classified as green. 41 can be classified as fossil fuel support. So while the recovery packages that are rolling out are the most green in history, we also have significant work to do to make sure public funds are being spent in ways that make sense. And I think what's really helping this conversation move forward is not just the cooperation that's been pushed in this topic for years with countries who are advanced in this space, engaging other countries on this file, but also the focus on pathways to net zero, where you can really see, if you walk it back over the next couple of decades, what types of investments we need to be making now with the public funds that we have, and how to crowd private sector investment into the spaces we need. Really needs to be singularly focused right now on the growth industries of the clean energy economy. And so I think that conversation is helping to kind of illustrate the levels of investment needed there and why we don't want to see public funds kind of working against each other in this critical moment.
Thank you very much. And back to Michael Mann with one last question, if I may. And when we talk about fossil fuel subsidies, ultimately we're also talking about the fact that there are powerful interests that want to keep our energy systems the way that they are. And that was very clear in your presentation when you showed us the newest arguments that are being made for why we don't actually have to change. How do we beat that? Those interests have powerful political lobbies, of course, and they also have influential voices in many media, as we could see from some of the articles that you put up on the screen. What do you think? Is that shifting, and how can we break that hold?
Yeah, thanks. That is part of the problem. We have some very powerful opponents here when it comes to our efforts to address the climate crisis. That's the bad news. The good news is we have some very powerful allies as well. The insurance and reinsurance industries, of course, recognize the cost to them if we don't act on the climate crisis. But increasingly, you see the finance and investment community beginning to move away from investments in new fossil fuel infrastructure. BlackRock, Bank of England. Increasingly, some of these large investment firms and finance firms are saying these are bad investments. Fossil fuels are bad investments because the fossil fuel companies are going to need to leave most of their assets in the ground. Those are stranded assets. It's a bad long-term investment that's called transition risk. But there's also physical risk, the harm that's going to be done by climate change itself. And a lot of, for example, superannuation fund managers who have a fiduciary responsibility to their clients, not to harm them, increasingly see climate impacts in sort of the broader scheme of fiduciary responsibility. If you have a responsibility to your client not to fund investments that are going to hurt your client, well, destroying the planet for your client and your client's children and grandchildren is clearly doing harm. And so increasingly, I do think you see that community start to embrace a broader notion of what fiduciary responsibility means. And to some extent, the real leadership now is coming from someplace people might not have expected it, from the world of finance. And I think with that ally, with those powerful allies, the wind at our backs, with the favorable shift in political winds here in the United States, the renewed leadership by the United States, the youth climate movement, all of these things coming together, as we started off at the beginning of the session saying, this is our moment, this is our time, let's do it.
Thank you very much. And I'm so glad you mentioned the financial sector because, in fact, here in Europe, it's a topic that's come up not only as part of a fiduciary responsibility, but also bank supervision. We're hearing both the Bank for International Settlements and also the European Central Bank say we need to put climate goals at the center of bank supervision as well. So a very, very interesting conclusion to this discussion. Thank you so much to all of our panel for being with us for this essentially wrap-up session on how we can use the green recovery after the pandemic to drive the shift in energy systems, but also decarbonization as a whole. Many thanks.